All right, strap in, everyone, because we are going deeper than a xenomorph nest, you could say. Our deep dive today is all about aliens. And we're not just going to skim the surface and say, oh yeah, classic film and move on. We're going full on analytical on this one, using, of course, your review as our guide.
Yeah, and Aliens is a film that can definitely handle that kind of deep dive. We're talking about a movie that pretty much shifted the entire landscape of science fiction.
Right. I mean, think about it.
Exactly. It takes what Ridley Scott did in Alien, that slow burn horror, and just ramps it up. It goes into a full-blown action fest, but somehow it doesn't lose any of the feeling of dread, the suspense. How did they pull that off?
Well, one thing that really stands out for me is that idea of overwhelming odds.
Okay.
Think about it, the situations that Ripley and the Marines are thrown into. They're completely outnumbered. They're surrounded by these just relentless creatures.
Oh, yeah.
And, you really feel that sense of hopelessness as a viewer. Almost like any victory they get is hard won. Oh, totally. Every time you think they might be safe, bam, another wave of xenomorphs. And speaking of Ripley, your review really highlighted Sigourney Weaver's performance, and for good reason. I mean, she was incredible. Did you know that she actually got an Oscar nomination for this role? That was pretty much unheard of for sci-fi back then.
Yeah, that's a great point. It really shows you just how powerful her performance was, how much she brought to the role. I mean, she takes Ripley from, survivor in Alien to this absolute powerhouse in Alien. She's a soldier, she's a leader, and I think most importantly, she embodies this fiercely protective maternal figure, especially with Newt. It's a side of her we hadn't really seen before.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. But before we dive into the whole motherhood thing, let's talk about the rest of the crew. You've got Hicks, he's kind of like the calm in the storm, right? And then there's Burke, the epitome of a corporate slimeball.
Oh yeah, it's amazing how Paul Reiser, who plays Burke, he manages to make him so hateable. Yet at the same time, you're kind of intrigued by the character. He really represents that classic sci-fi trope of corporate greed.
Right.
The guy who's always putting profits above people.
He's the worst. But then you have Bishop, the android, who completely flips the script on how we see synthetics after Ash and Alien.
Exactly. Bishop's presence forces us to, question our assumptions about artificial intelligence. Can they be trustworthy? Can they be heroic? Is he genuinely being selfless, or is he just following his programming? These questions add a whole other layer to the film.
Oh, for sure. And of course, who could forget Hudson, played by the one and only Bill Paxton. He brings the comic relief, But he also goes through this really human transformation from cocky Marine to scared kid.
Yeah, he's that everyman character, right? He represents the audience's own anxieties and fears when they're faced with the unknown.
Exactly. So we've got these incredibly well-developed characters, right? But how does the film, visually build that constant feeling of tension? I mean, the review definitely mentioned the cinematography as being really effective.
Well, Adrian Biddle, the cinematographer, he uses darkness and shadows masterfully.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, think about the way he frames the xenomorphs. Often they're obscured, lurking in the background.
Right.
He uses strobe lighting to create these really disorienting, almost nightmarish sequences.
Oh, yeah.
And all these elements work together to keep you on edge. You never quite feel safe.
It's like the film itself is a xenomorph constantly stalking you. And you know what else is genius? The sound design, those pulse rifles, the motion tracker beeps, and those chilling xenomorph screeches, they're just so iconic. Even today, you hear those sounds echoed in other movies and video games.
Yeah, it's a real testament to the lasting impact of Aliens. Those sounds have become part of our cultural lexicon. Instantly recognizable, even if you haven't seen the film.
For sure.
And James Horner's score, too, deserves a mention. That blend of eerie suspense with those militaristic themes is just perfect.
Oh, man. That motion tracker scene still gives me chills. And speaking of iconic, we got to talk about the practical effects, especially the alien queen.
Oh, yeah.
Stan Winston and his team, they created a monster that's terrifying, but also somehow kind of beautiful at the same time.
And remember, this was all done before CGI was commonplace.
Right.
So the realism of those practical effects was groundbreaking. The Queen, in particular, is just a masterpiece of creature design. I mean, she's massive, she's powerful, and she's a mother, fiercely protective of her offspring. Which brings us back to those themes of motherhood that we touched on earlier, actually.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, tell me more about that.
How the film sets up this parallel between Ripley and the Queen.
Okay.
They're both mothers fighting for the survival of their children, even if those children are, a little girl and a bunch of xenomorph eggs.
So it's like this primal struggle, but with pulse rifles and spaceships thrown in. And let's be real, you kind of find yourself rooting for both of them, at different points in the film at least.
Right. It's really a testament to Cameron's skill as a director, that he can make you empathize with these characters, even the monstrous ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, Ripley's story in Aliens, it goes beyond just motherhood. She's dealing with some serious trauma from her encounter with the xenomorph in the first film. You can see it in her nightmares, her reluctance to go back into space, her difficulty connecting with people.
Oh, yeah. She definitely has some trust issues, especially when it comes to androids, and who can blame her, but it makes her arc in this film even more powerful. Like, she's not just fighting aliens, she's battling her own demons. And that theme of corporate greed that the review mentioned, man, it's so relevant even today.
Oh, absolutely. Burke, with his shady dealings and obsession with bringing xenomorph specimens back to Earth, he perfectly embodies that corporate mentality of profit over people. And the company he represents, Weyland-Yutani, well, they become this shadowy, almost mythical representation of corporate power running unchecked.
It makes you wonder, are we just a few bad decisions away from a real-life xenomorph outbreak? I mean, some companies will do just about anything for a profit.
Right.
It's scary to think about. But the film doesn't just critique corporations. It also questions military might. You've got these highly trained Marines with all the latest tech, and they still get completely outmatched by the xenomorphs.
Exactly. It's a reminder that brute force and technology aren't always the answer. The xenomorphs, with their primal instincts and cunning strategies, they represent a force that can't be easily controlled or defeated.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how we approach problems in our own lives. Do we always need to go in, guns blazing? Or is there a smarter, more nuanced approach?
Deep stuff. Now, the review did mention a few criticisms, like the pacing in the first act. Some people found it a bit slow.
Yeah, I could see that. Cameron does take his time establishing the characters and the setting on LV-426, but I think that build-up is essential to the film's overall effectiveness. It allows you to connect with the characters before the chaos hits.
Right. I agree with that. And that slow burn just makes the action sequences even more intense when they finally explode. But what about the criticism of some of the Maline characters being a bit over the top, especially Hudson?
Yeah, I mean, I can see where people are coming from with that. But I think those larger-than-life personalities serve a purpose. They add a layer of humor and energy to the film.
Right.
And honestly, who hasn't met a Hudson in their own life? That person who talks a big game but crumbles under pressure.
Yeah. We all know a Hudson. And visually, the film has aged pretty well, considering it was released in 1986. But the review did point out that some of the special effects look a little dated.
Yeah, that's true, especially the spaceship composites. But I think those imperfections add a certain charm. They remind us of a time when practical effects were king, and filmmakers had to be incredibly creative to bring their visions to life.
Totally. It's like those little imperfections make it feel more real, more human. It's a reminder that even in the future, things aren't always going to be sleek and perfect. And speaking of different versions, the review mentioned a special edition of Aliens.
Oh, right. Yeah, Cameron released a special edition a few years after the theatrical release. It has about 17 minutes of extra footage, mainly scenes that flesh out Ripley's backstory and what happened to the colonists on LV-426.
So is the special edition a must-watch for fans?
I wouldn't say it's essential for a first viewing. The theatrical cut is a tight, perfectly paced experience. But for those who want to delve even deeper into the world of Aliens, the special edition offers some interesting insights and adds a bit more emotional weight to Ripley's journey.
So it's like the director's cut of Aliens. Cool. We've covered a lot of ground here, from intense action sequences to deep thematic discussions, to even addressing some criticisms. But what does it all mean? What's the big takeaway from our deep dive into Aliens?
One thing that strikes me is how Aliens proved that sequels can not only live up to the original, but can actually surpass them. It expanded the world, deepened the characters, and added new layers of meaning to the story.
Yeah, for sure. And it showed that science fiction can be so much more than just spaceships and laser guns. It can explore really complex human themes like motherhood, trauma, corporate greed.
Exactly. And that brings us to something I think you'll find really interesting. Aliens showed us how sequels can push boundaries and redefine genres. So I want to ask you, how do you think science fiction has evolved since Aliens?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, Aliens came out in '86. That's almost 40 years ago. So much has changed in film and in our world.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, what elements of Aliens do we see reflected in modern sci-fi? Is it the focus on strong female characters like Ripley? Or maybe the exploration of corporate power and its impact on humanity?
I think those themes are definitely still relevant today, maybe even more so. And you see them explored in films like Arrival, where communication and understanding are key. Or in District 9, which takes a hard look at social injustice and xenophobia.
Those are excellent examples. And you can't forget about the visual and technical advancements. Aliens push the boundaries of practical effects. But CGI has opened up a whole new world of possibilities for sci-fi filmmakers. Think about the stunning visuals in films like Gravity or Interstellar. They create these breathtaking, immersive experiences that wouldn't have been possible back then.
Totally. But even with all the CGI wizardry, I think there's still something special about the raw, visceral impact of practical effects. Like, remember that scene where the alien queen bursts out of the dropship? Pure movie magic.
Absolutely. And that speaks to another element of Aliens that continues to resonate, the sheer intensity and suspense. Modern sci-fi films like Edge of Tomorrow and A Quiet Place, they've tapped into that same adrenaline-fueled energy, keeping audiences on the edge of their seats.
For sure. It's that combination of action, suspense, and thought-provoking themes that makes Aliens such a timeless classic. It's a film that keeps you entertained, but also makes you think about bigger issues.
And that's the beauty of great science fiction. It can transport us to other worlds, introduce us to fascinating characters, and challenge us to see our own reality in a new light.
It's been an awesome deep dive, exploring all the layers of Aliens, going beyond just the explosions and alien battles, and really appreciating the film's craftsmanship and enduring impact.
It's amazing to think that a film released almost 4 decades ago can still spark such engaging conversations and inspire us to consider the future of science fiction.
So as we sign off, here's one last thought for you to ponder. What kind of future do you think Aliens predicts? And what role will humanity play in shaping that future?
Keep those questions in mind as you explore the vast and ever-evolving world of science fiction.
And until next time, keep diving deep.
Yeah, it's like they're both fighting for their own, version of family.
Right. It is a very primal struggle, just with a sci-fi twist to it.
Yeah, exactly. Pulse rifles and spaceships.
Exactly.
But it really is a testament to Cameron's skill as a director that he can make you empathize with both of them. Even the monstrous ones.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There are points in that movie where you're like, go Queen. And then other times, obviously, you're rooting for Ripley. But Ripley's story, it goes beyond just motherhood, right?
For sure. I mean, she's dealing with some serious trauma from the first film. Her encounter with the Xenomorphs in Alien, I mean, you can see it. In her nightmares, her reluctance to go back into space, she has a hard time connecting with people.
Oh, yeah. She's got some serious trust issues, especially when it comes to androids. And who can blame her after Ash? But it just makes her arc in this film even more powerful. Like, she's not just fighting these aliens. She's fighting her own inner demons, too. I mean, it's a very human story, even though it's set in space. And that theme of corporate greed that the review mentioned, man, it is so relevant even today.
Oh, absolutely.
Kind of scary how relevant it is.
Yeah, I mean, Burke, with his shady dealings, his obsession with bringing those xenomorph specimens back to Earth, he's the perfect embodiment of that corporate mentality. Profit over people, no matter the cost.
Yeah, he's the worst.
And the company he represents, Weyland-Yutani, they become this shadowy, almost mythical representation of corporate power. Just running unchecked,
It makes you wonder if we're just a few bad decisions away from it, like a real-life xenomorph outbreak,
Right.
It's a scary thought.
I mean, some companies would probably do just about anything for a profit.
Yeah, that's true. But the film doesn't just critique corporations, though. It also questions military might, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, you've got these highly trained Marines with all the latest technology, and they still get completely outmatched by the Xenomorphs.
Exactly. It really shows you that brute force and technology aren't always the answer. Sometimes they're just not enough.
Yeah.
And the Xenomorphs with their primal instincts and their cunning strategies, they represent a force that can't just be easily controlled or defeated.
That's interesting.
And it kind of makes you think about how we approach problems in our own lives. Do we always have to go in guns blazing, or is there a smarter, more nuanced approach?
Yeah, that's deep. It's making me think. Now, the review, it did mention a few criticisms of the film, like the pacing in the first act. Some people found it a bit slow.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, Cameron does take his time establishing the characters, the setting on LV-426.
Right.
But I think that buildup is really essential to the film's overall effectiveness. It lets you connect with the characters before all the chaos breaks loose.
Right. And then when it does break loose, it's so much more impactful because you actually care about these characters.
Exactly.
What about the criticism that some of the Marine characters were a bit over the top, especially Hudson?
Yeah, I mean, some people might find them a bit much.
Yeah.
But I think those larger-than-life personalities, they actually serve a purpose in the film. They add a layer of humor and energy, And let's be honest, who hasn't met a Hudson in their own life? That person who talks a big game but then crumbles under pressure.
Oh, yeah. We all know Hudson. And visually, I think the film has actually aged pretty well, considering it came out in 1986.
Yeah, for the most part.
But the review did point out that some of the special effects, they look a little dated now.
Yeah, that's true. Some of the spaceship composites especially.
Right.
But I think those imperfections, they kind of add a certain charm to the film.
Yeah.
It reminds us of a time when practical effects were king. And filmmakers had to be so creative to bring their visions to life.
Yeah, and it gives it that sort of almost like a handmade quality, which is kind of cool. And speaking of different versions of the film, the review mentioned a special edition of Aliens.
Oh, right, yeah.
But what's the deal with that?
Yeah, so Cameron, he released a special edition a few years after the theatrical release. It has about 17 minutes of extra footage, mostly scenes that flesh out Ripley's backstory. And what happened to the colonists on LV-426?
Oh, interesting. So is the special edition a must-watch for fans?
I don't think it's essential for a first viewing. The theatrical cut it's a tight, perfectly paced experience. But for those who want to delve even deeper into the world of Aliens, the special edition does offer some interesting insights and adds a bit more emotional weight to Ripley's journey.
So it's like the director's cut. Cool. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Intense action, deep thematic discussions. We even addressed some criticisms. But what does it all mean? What's the big takeaway from our deep dive into Aliens?
I think one of the biggest things that Aliens shows us is that sequels, they can not only live up to the original, but they can actually surpass them.
Right.
It expanded the world of Alien, deepened the characters, and added all these new layers of meaning to the story.
And it also showed that science fiction, it can be so much more than just spaceships and laser guns. It can explore these really complex human themes like motherhood, trauma, corporate greed.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to something that I think you'll find interesting.
Okay.
Aliens showed us how sequels can push boundaries and redefine genres. So I want to ask you, how do you think science fiction has evolved since Aliens?
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? I mean, 86, that's like almost a whole different world, right?
Yeah, totally. Like what from Aliens do we see in sci-fi now? Is it that tough, female lead thing?
I mean, that's definitely still huge.
Yeah.
It's not just Ripley, it's everywhere.
Exactly, yeah.
But also, that corporate power thing.
Oh, yeah.
That feels more relevant than ever.
It's scary how relevant it is, honestly.
Yeah, totally. Like you see it in Arrival, that whole idea of communication or lack of it and how that impacts things. Or, District 9, that was a really powerful one.
Yeah, that social commentary aspect.
Yeah, and how we treat the,
Totally.
That's straight out of Aliens, but modernized,
Yeah, and we can't forget the visuals, right? Like Aliens pushed the limits with the practical stuff, but now CGI. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's a whole different ballgame.
Totally different.
Like Gravity, Interstellar, that kind of stuff.
Oh, those are just breathtaking.
Yeah, you couldn't do that back then. No way.
No way, no way. But I still think there's something about those practical effects, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
That raw, like, you're really there feeling. Like that queen bursting out of the dropship.
Oh, man, yeah.
You can't beat that.
You can't, no. It's pure movie magic.
It is.
And speaking of that, I think the intensity, the aliens, that suspense,
Oh, yeah.
that carries on too, right? Like Edge of Tomorrow, that had a similar vibe. A Quiet Place, completely different, but that same edge of your seat.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So it's like Aliens wasn't just a good movie.
No.
It was almost a blueprint.
It's a whole style.
Yeah, exactly. Like action, suspense, but you're still thinking about it after.
You're not just entertained, you're engaged with it.
Exactly.
And that's what good sci-fi does.
It makes you think.
Yeah, it takes us to other world, but it reflects our own world back at us.
Very well found. Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah, it has.
Really digging into all the layers of Aliens. It's more than just like an action flick.
It's a film that's stood the test of time.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that something almost 40 years old can still spark these conversations.
And inspire us, to think about the future of sci-fi.
Yeah, exactly.
And all that. So before we go, one last thought for everyone out there. What future do you think Aliens predicts? And what role will we play in shaping that future?
Keep those questions in mind as you explore the amazing world of science fiction.
And until next time, keep diving deep.